The Mutiny on the Bounty in 1789 is one of the most famous naval incidents in British history. Most of us have heard of it, and many can name William Bligh and Fletcher Christian. But what exactly do you know about it? The story has been immortalised in 3 major Hollywood films. The 1935 version with Charles Laughton and Clark Gable, the 1962 remake with Trevor Howard and Marlon Brando, and the 1984 adaptation with Anthony Hopkins and Mel Gibson. These films have shaped our understanding of events, typically portraying Bligh as a cruel tyrant and rigid disciplinarian, with Fletcher Christian as the romantic hero fighting for decency and the common man. But the real story is far more nuanced and considerably more interesting. This was more than a simple mutiny against a tyrant. It was a mission tied to the slave trade in the West Indies that resulted in an epic voyage by Bligh in the ship's longboat, and the foundation of a remote British colony by the mutineers that still exists to this day. The voyage of the Bounty began with an unusual purpose. The ship was tasked with collecting breadfruit plants from Tahiti in the Pacific and transporting them to the West Indies. Now, this wasn't a botanical curiosity. The plantation owners in the Caribbean needed cheap, nutritious food to feed their enslaved workers. Breadfruit, which grew abundantly in the South Pacific, was seen as the perfect solution. A single breadfruit tree could produce hundreds of fruits every year, and the starchy fruit could be roasted, baked, or boiled. The mission was championed by Sir Joseph Banks, who at this time was President of the Royal Society, a position that he would hold for over 40 years. During his tenure, Banks helped establish the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew. He had seen breadfruit during his own visits to Tahiti back in 1769. The Bounty itself was a modest vessel. Originally a merchant ship named Bethia, it had been purchased by the Royal Navy and refitted for the voyage. At just 215 tons and approximately 91 feet long, it was relatively small for such an ambitious journey. Just to put that into some sort of comparison, that's a tenth of the size of HMS Victory. And even on this small ship, much of the interior had been converted to accommodate the breadfruit plants. Crucially, it was designated as an armed transport rather than a warship, which meant that it carried no Royal Marines. And Marines traditionally provided shipboard security and would have been the natural force to suppress any unrest among the crew. The expedition was commanded by Lieutenant William Bligh. Born in Plymouth in 1754, Bligh had gone to sea as a young man and established his reputation serving under Captain James Cook on his 3rd and final voyage to the Pacific. Cook actually praised Bligh's abilities as a navigator and surveyor, and Bligh served as sailing master on the Resolution. He was also present at Cook's death in Hawaii in February 1779. After returning to England, Bligh was made lieutenant in 1781, and by 1787, at the age of 33, he was selected to command the breadfruit expedition, largely on the recommendation of Sir Joseph Banks. Bligh was an exceptionally skilled navigator and sailor, but he was not yet a full captain. His rank of lieutenant meant that his authority depended heavily on the respect of his crew and his other officers, of which there was sort of only one at the beginning, the ship's master, John Fryer. Born in 1753 at Wells next to the sea in Norfolk, Fryer had joined the Royal Navy as a young man and had worked his way up through the ranks. Now, the role of master was distinct from that of captain. While Bligh commanded the ship and the mission, Fryer was responsible for navigation, the ship's stores, and the day-to-day sailing operations. The master was actually a warrant officer, so technically senior in experience, but subordinate in command to any commissioned officers on board, which in this case, at this stage, was just Bligh. This division of responsibilities could create tension, particularly when personalities clashed. And here comes one of those personalities. Fletcher Christian came from a respectable but declining gentry family in Cumberland. Born in September 1764, He was considerably younger than Bligh, barely 23 when the Bounty sailed. The two had sailed together before on merchant voyages, and Bligh had been impressed enough with Christian to recruit him specifically for the Bounty voyage. Christian joined as a master's mate, a position of some responsibility. He was well educated, personable and capable. Exactly the sort of young man and potential officer that Bligh wanted to come along on such a challenging expedition. Besides the officers, the crew included able seamen, petty officers, a surgeon named Thomas Huggan, a botanist named David Nelson to care for the breadfruit plants, and even a fiddler, Michael Byrne, to provide entertainment and boost morale. The Bounty departed Spithead on the 23rd of December 1787. The plan was to sail round Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America and then northwest to Tahiti. But upon reaching Cape Horn in March 1788, the Bounty encountered furious storms. For a full month, the ship battled mountainous seas and freezing conditions, making no progress whatsoever. On the 22nd of April 1788, Bligh made the difficult but sensible decision to abandon the attempt. They would instead take the longer route east, around the Cape of Good Hope at the bottom of Africa, across the Indian Ocean and then to the Pacific. This dramatically extended an already long voyage. The crew wouldn't reach Tahiti until the 26th of October 1788, 10 months after leaving England, and having sailed more than 27,000 miles. Mind you, only one member of the crew had been lost by the time they reached Tahiti. Able seaman James Valentine died from a blood infection caused by surgeon Thomas Huggin's careless bloodletting while treating him for asthma. To cover his error, Huggin falsely reported to Bligh that Valentine had actually died from scurvy. With some poetic justice, Huggin himself became the next crew member to die, passing away approximately 6 weeks after the Bounty's arrival in Tahiti. The Bounty remained in Tahiti for 5 months to enable the breadfruit plants time to mature and survive the ocean voyage. Bligh established a shore camp at Matavai Bay, where much of the crew lived. And that long break in Tahiti would prove fatal to his expedition. Tahitian society was welcoming and operated under very different social rules than Georgian England. The climate was pleasant, food was abundant, and many crew members, including Fletcher Christian, formed relationships with Tahitian women. For men accustomed to the harsh discipline and poor conditions of naval life, Tahiti seemed like paradise. During this period, Bligh worked diligently on the mission, overseeing the collection and preparation of the breadfruit plants. By the time the Bounty departed on the 4th of April 1789, the ship carried 1,015 breadfruit plants. The precious cargo took up an enormous space, leaving even less room for the crew and making the already cramped vessel even more unbearable. The popular image of Bligh as a brutal tyrant doesn't actually match the evidence. By the standards of the Royal Navy at the time, Bligh was actually relatively lenient. He ordered fewer floggings than most commanders and generally ran a less harsh regime than was typical. The Bounty's punishment log shows that he was far from the sadistic disciplinarian portrayed in the Hollywood films. However, Bligh had other significant faults. Firstly, he was not exactly diplomatic. During the voyage out from England, he had promoted Christian to acting lieutenant, which John Fryer, probably rightly, saw as undermining his own position as master. These tensions had created a poisonous atmosphere amongst the 3 officers, something noted by the crew. Now, anxious about the plants and determined to complete his mission successfully, Bligh became increasingly irritable. He accused crew members of theft from the ship's stores, and his tongue grew increasingly cutting. Christian, as senior subordinate officer, bore the brunt of this treatment. In the days before the mutiny, Bligh publicly accused Christian of stealing coconuts and berated him in front of the whole crew. For a gentleman who prided himself on his honour, this public humiliation was unbearable. Christian appears to have reached a breaking point after the final humiliating confrontation over those coconuts. The night before the mutiny, he had seriously considered deserting the ship on a makeshift raft. Instead, he made the fatal decision to seize the vessel. On the morning of the 28th of April, 1789, just 3 weeks after leaving Tahiti, Fletcher Christian led a mutiny. He and 22 other crew members seized control of the ship in the early hours before dawn. They dragged Bligh from his cabin at bayonet point and, despite his protests, bound his hands behind his back. Well, you can probably understand Fletcher Christian's reasons, but what about the rest of the mutineers? Why did they join in? As ever, the reasons were varied. Some were loyal to the charismatic Christian. Some fancied the relaxed life of Tahiti, and others also had women there. And some probably were just swept up in the events, a sort of herd mentality. But it was not, as suggested in the Mel Gibson 1984 film, because Bligh wanted once more to tackle the treacherous Cape Horn. When the mutiny took place, Bligh was actually sailing westwards towards modern-day Indonesia and the Indian Ocean beyond. Nevertheless, with the element of surprise, Bligh bound and having seized the weapons store, the mutineers were in charge of the bounty. Bligh, along with 18 men who remained loyal to him, was forced into the ship's 23-foot launch or cutter. The mutineers allowed them a small amount of food, some water and some navigational instruments, though no firearms. Significantly, despite having been passed over and slighted by Bligh, John Fryer remained loyal to him and joined him in the cutter. And this probably proves that the mutiny wasn't simply about Bligh's command style, but involved more complex personal dynamics, particularly between Bligh and Christian. Fletcher Christian knew that the penalty for mutiny was death. He initially sailed back to Tahiti, where the bounty arrived in late June 1789. 16 of the mutineers chose to stay there, either believing that they wouldn't get caught or simply preferring to take their chances. Some had Tahitian wives and saw no reason to abandon them. Those men were wrong about their safety. In 1790, the Royal Navy dispatched HMS Pandora under Captain Edward Edwards to hunt down the mutineers. The Pandora reached Tahiti in March 1791 and arrested 14 of the men. They were confined in a wooden cell built on the deck, which the crew grimly nicknamed Pandora's Box. The Pandora then searched unsuccessfully for Christian and the other mutineers, before being shipwrecked on the Great Barrier Reef in August 1791. 4 of the prisoners were drowned when the ship sank. The survivors, including 10 mutineers, eventually reached England, where 3 were hanged. Meanwhile, Christian and 8 others, knowing that Tahiti offered no real safety, recruited 6 Tahitian men and 12 Tahitian women to accompany them. After months of searching, they eventually found Pitcairn Island in January 1790. This tiny, remote island had been incorrectly charted, which meant that anyone searching for them following a map would be looking in the wrong place. Nevertheless, they burned the bounty just to avoid detection. Life on Pitcairn was far from idyllic. Violence and conflict plagued the tiny community. By 1800, only 1 mutineer, John Adams, remained alive, along with 9 women and 23 children. The settlement wasn't discovered until 1808, nearly 20 years after the mutiny, and by then the British interest in punishing the mutineers had faded, and Adams was allowed to remain at large. Pitcairn became a British colony and remains a British overseas territory to this day, with a tiny population of 4 dozen, almost all entirely descended from the mutineers and their Tahitian companions. Meanwhile, what happened to Bligh and his 18 companions in the lifeboat? Well, the situation, quite frankly, seemed hopeless. They were in a 23-foot open boat, dangerously overloaded, with minimal supplies, thousands of miles from any friendly port. Don't forget, there was no country called Australia at this time. In fact, the nearest European settlement was the Dutch-controlled port at Koh Pang on the island of Timor, more than 3,600 nautical miles away. But Bligh proved himself a navigator of extraordinary ability. He immediately rationed the meagre supplies to 1 ounce of bread and a quarter pint of water per man per day. He then plotted a course westward, avoiding most inhabited islands to reduce the risk of attack. On the 2nd of May, they attempted to land at Tofua to gather supplies, but were attacked by hostile locals. John Norton, the quartermaster, was killed. Only man lost during this entire voyage. Over 47 days, navigating with only a sextant and his own remarkable skill, Bligh guided the boat more than 3,600 nautical miles across the Pacific. They endured storms, constant hunger, and the psychological torment of seemingly endless ocean. Finally, on the 14th of June, 1789, they reached Kupang. It remains one of the greatest feats of navigation and seamanship in maritime history. Once back in England, Bligh faced the mandatory court-martial that followed the loss of any Royal Navy vessel. The court-martial was held in October 1790. Bligh was acquitted, with the court finding that he had done everything possible to prevent the mutiny and had shown exceptional skill in bringing the survivors to safety. Bligh then published his account of the voyage in 1790, which painted Christian and the mutineers in the darkest possible terms. This narrative was actually challenged by Fletcher Christian's brothers, who sought to defend their family's honour, and John Fryer provided a more balanced perspective, noting Bligh's difficult personality, whilst confirming the essential facts of the mutiny. John Fryer continued his naval career after his return. He eventually rose to master of the ship of the line battleship Prince of Wales. He retired from active service in 1812 and died in 1817. Bligh's career flourished after the mutiny. He was promoted to captain and given command of HMS Providence for a second breadfruit expedition, this time with a full complement of Royal Marines. He succeeded in transporting breadfruit plants to the West Indies in 1793. Ironically, the enslaved people for whom the breadfruit was intended initially rejected it, finding it bland compared to their traditional foods. However, over time, breadfruit became incorporated into Caribbean cuisine, and today it features in numerous traditional recipes throughout the region. Bligh went on to serve with distinction during the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. He commanded HMS Director at the Battle of Camperdown in 1797, and then HMS Glatton at the Battle of Copenhagen in 1801, where Admiral Nelson specifically praised his conduct and courage under fire. In 1805, Bligh was appointed Governor of New South Wales, Australia, where he would once more face yet another mutiny. But that is another story entirely. But guess what? I'm going to be telling it very soon. In the meantime, you might also enjoy this story too. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I look forward to telling you more forgotten stories from British history very soon.